Welcome to MeDeMAP, Mapping Media for Future Democracies. Join us on a journey across Europe. Meet specialists and researchers from various fields, unravel the democratic functions of media, and discuss its impact on the essence of democracy. MeDeMAP.
Hi, my name is Ana Oliveira and welcome to the MeDeMAP podcast, Mapping Media Democracies. I'll be your host for this series of podcasts, and today we have with us Nico Carpentier. So Nico Carpentier is an extraordinary professor at Charles University. He's a researcher in the fields of media and democracy, and he is the leader of Work Package 2, the theoretical embedding that sustains this project, MeDeMAP. Welcome, Nico, and thank you very much for being here today. And so I would like to start with a general overview of the work that you and your team have been conducting within this small project, within the big project that is MeDeMAP. And what can you tell us about this theoretical embedding?
Well, it always sounds terrible if you start talking about theory. But at the same time, it's an incredibly important part of any kind of research project, because you need to know what you're going to study, what your concepts are. And it's easy to say, we are going to talk about media and democracy. And then the question comes up, but what is media and what is democracy? And one of our arguments, what we were writing about, is that these are not stable concepts. These are actually political notions that are constantly negotiated in a society, where if you ask a person, what is democracy for you, they might come up with one answer. If you ask another person the same question, they will say something completely different. And what we were trying to do was to capture that fluidity in working through theory, trying to emphasize for all our colleagues, but also for our own work, trying to emphasize that democracy and media in relationship to democracy is not stable. There's a constant struggle going on. There are all sorts of movements. Sometimes democracy is just seen as politics, what the government does. But then you ask yourself, but if I'm in a school and there is a classroom, is there no democracy there? Mm-hmm. And that's a very different way of talking about democracy. And what we were trying to capture was not only that these different versions of democracy and media democracy exist, but also that they're contested, that people have very different ideas that often in very civil ways are engaged in a struggle. So that's what we wanted to capture with that part of the project. And theory really matters there because it allows us to open up discussions that normally are never talked about, never opened up. This idea of struggle is not something that is very, very common, but I think it's at the very heart of democracy. It's a civilized struggle within reason. Sometimes it gets a bit out of hand, but it's a fairly civilized struggle. But it is a conflict nevertheless. And so behind all that was, we are media scholars and communication scholars, but we also need to be interested in the political. We need to be interested in what is democracy if we want to understand how democracy in the media functions. And so our theoretical work actually has quite a unique balance between lots of attention for democracy and lots of attention for the role of media in democracy. They're actually equal. But they come from very different fields. I mean, the first is clearly political theory and political philosophy, and the other is media studies. And what we try to do is to pay respect to both traditions, and that allowed us to think about how these different areas, fields, how they interact, how they strengthen each other, how they are threatened, how they exist, but also how they are contested.
And it was a really complex work that you conducted.
A bit.
You and your team. But you mentioned there are key aspects that are more crucial today than they were many years ago. And we are living and we are going through major changes within Europe and the context of Europe. And I would like to ask you about the current scenario of media and democracy across Europe and how this theoretical framework can contextualize and can help us contextualize this landscape?
Yeah, that's not a very happy story to tell because I think there's lots of concern about democracy being weakened and possibly even being lost. We've all lived in democratic states. In some countries, democracy has been established not that long ago. Portugal is one case, Greece is another case. Democracy can also be lost. It's not something that is necessarily stable, that is necessarily forever. And that relationship with media actually works out in both directions. Media can strengthen democracy, media can weaken democracy. For more authoritarian leaders, media are a tool against democracy, for instance. So we see all these dynamics, which are, I think, vital in understanding how media and democracy function nowadays. Because in many cases, of course, media still strengthen democracy. It still plays this more benevolent role. But we also see in a number of European countries that this role is undermined, that media are weakened, that they are, take for instance the Polish public service broadcaster, that they're integrated into very particular regimes where they cannot play the role of a democratic entity anymore, or their role is reduced. So one of the stories that we are telling is a story of democracy being threatened and media playing a role in that. And that is one of the answers that is maybe a bit troubling. Media can work against democracy, and if we don't protect them, if we don't appreciate them, if we don't find financial models that allow them to have their independence, we will lose a lot. And so the current model of media democracy is not a bad one. It is still quite stable in protecting democracy, but it's under threat. It's under threat of financial crisis. It's under threat of a pull towards authoritarian regimes, meaning a pull outside of democracy. But it's also, I think, under threat of a society or a series of societies that are becoming harsher. Because for me, democracy is also a model to reduce violence. It's one of the key functions of democracy, is to pacify conflict, is to prevent people bashing in each other's heads because they disagree. And what we see is some of that bashing in each other's heads on media. And in particular, of course, where the less moderated versions in social media come out, we'll see that there's strong forms of harassment, which is violence in the end. There's strong versions of antagonism where people no longer find ways to agree but fight each other. There's processes of doxing, which can be extremely harmful. So we see a level of violence played out in media that is disrupting that entire democratic idea. And again, this is a fundamental and a genuine threat. So if you talk about the model of media and democracy, it is shifting, it is evolving, and these are reasons for concern.
And now that you mentioned these changes that we are facing in the media landscape, and considering the work that we have been conducting during this first year of the project, almost, what implications and contributions can this theoretical framework bring to studying media and democracy as a whole?
That's a very difficult question because it actually raises the question, what's the utility of theory? Why is it there? And what theory does, it gives you glasses to see. And of course, people are not blind, but if you use theory, you see better, you see more. You see things that are hidden. You see mechanisms that circulate through society, but that are sometimes part of hegemonic processes. And that means they're invisible. What theory does is to make things more visible. And that is, I think, one of the key implications. We talked a lot about, in our work, about this notion of struggle and the idea that different groups in society actually don't agree on what democracy is or what the role of media in democracy is. Some want, if it's about the media, some want more information, high-quality information, and that suffices, right, the informational role of media. But then others say, no, it needs to be our platform. It's our media, right, which was an old slogan from the era of alternative media, like in the media. And they have very oppositional positions. It's not that they're, of course, engaging in violent conflict over them, but they're constantly struggling over these processes and trying to control them. And that's what theory shows. It allows you to see processes that are deep down in our societies, hidden through everyday life practices, because we don't always have the time to stop and reflect and see these very minute elements of struggle. That's one big point that I think where we really wanted to contribute, is to make sure that the invisible becomes visible. And one of, I think, the related discussions, struggle was one key point that we wanted to make visible. The other was the role of both the discursive and the material. And in research, you have two main traditions. One that goes more into the culturalist area, that looks at the discursive, that looks at meaning, that looks at ideology. And then you have the more material component, where we look at structures, where we look at financial models, where we look at law and policy, and trying to bring these together, trying to have them talk to each other, trying to find a way to understand that the discursive reality and the material reality are entangled, that they're constantly interacting with each other, that they're not necessarily separate realities, but that how we give meaning also is connected to these material structures, and that these material structures also are grounded in the way we think. And that, for me, is a very important sort of component of research or theory, is to make that relationship of entanglement, that always necessary connection between material elements and discursive elements, to make that visible. And that is, I think, hopefully, one of the areas where we could have contributed a little bit.
So you mentioned all these entanglements and all these interconnections that you and your team try to make sense of within this research that you have been conducting. And in terms of impact of this, how are you going to materialize this, and how can MeDeMAP help us advance in the understanding of all these connections in media and democracies?
This is where it gets interesting in this particular project, because it has a very unique setup, which I'm not sure that if all the researchers already understood, but sometimes a theory component of a research project is for first 6 months, and then it stops. And then everybody can forget about theory. Here, our role is permanent, because our work on theory continues endlessly. It means that I can engage with all the researchers about theory and engage and work with them to see how these theoretical debates actually get translated into all these different smaller research projects that we're setting up now. So if we're going to do an ethnographic research with audiences and organize focus groups with them, I'm actually involved in creating questions that make sense from a theoretical perspective as well as from a research perspective. And that sounds terribly technical, but that's a real gift, because A, it's incredibly fun for me, because of course theory in itself is important, but also, and this is of course a famous Foucault quote, theory are toolboxes. There's the hammers and the saws that you can then use to do things. And that's incredibly fun as well. That is a really important thing, is to then start using these theoretical concepts to do the actual research, not disconnecting research from theory, and also not allowing theory to impose itself Theory should not decide. Theory is an instrument to understand social reality, and it interacts really well with empirical research. And so in this project, because we are constantly engaging in discussions about research and theory, we're doing something really, really unique. And secondly, and that also is quite unique in research, in large research projects, we are having moments of re-theoretization, where at the end of an empirical research phase, when all the work's been done and the analysis has been done and we know a lot more, then we can come in and say like, yeah, but what does this mean for our concepts? Has anything now changed? Did we learn something at the conceptual level? Does our theory need to change? And that's also a luxury, because again, theory is not something outside reality. Theory is reality. And having that confrontation with reality allows us to build better theory and better research. And that's a gift.
It really is. So thank you, Nico, very much for this really interesting conversation and enlightening conversation about the importance of theory for understanding the realities that we are currently experiencing. And thank you for watching and listening to us. And we hope to see you in our next episode.